The way that they are similar is that they both require you to use your imagination, which is something I've always loved to do. And I've often noticed that when people are creative, their creativity spills over in different ways. Because in speculative fiction, sometimes you're creating alternate realities, if not whole worlds. And you get this unique chance to place characters in situations that make a person reflect rather than just on the nose telling them, what's going on. Like the fifth season by N.K. Jemisin is such an interesting exploration of African American history and racism and things like that, and geography and power, the politics of power. But none of it is really said outright. It's all stuff that you dig into as you explore that world and the superpowered people who live in it.
Hi everyone, welcome back to In Sync. As always, we're so excited to share our guest for today, but this episode in particular is great for anyone looking to get into the world of science fiction and art at the same time. Because we have with us the winner of the 2019 Salam Award, Kehkashan Khalid, a writer and illustrator from Karachi. Since then, her stories have appeared in several international anthologies. She is also editor at the Savar magazine, which showcases work by South Asian writers, and works part-time as lead narrative writer at Frag Games to design the narrative for Pakistan's first historical fantasy video game. Kehkashan, I am so excited to have you here today.
Thank you so much, Anmol. It's really awesome to be here. I'm so glad this worked out. I know we've been trying to get together for ages. And really happy this worked out. I'm excited to chat with you.
So am I. And one of the reasons I've been trying so hard to make this work is I find your work so inspiring. And I thought that you would be such a good fit for the episode where we're focusing on, art and creativity and well-being. And I think just to get us started, the first thing that I'm sure our listeners would love to know is what gets you out of bed in the morning? What gives you that drive to go and pursue all of these amazing creative outlets?
Well, that's very kind of you to say that my work was inspiring. It's always nice for writers to hear that. I always say that if you've enjoyed a writer's work, go and tell them, because they're probably waiting to hear from, their readers, and it's a really nice thing to hear. So what gets me out of bed in the morning? That is a tough question. I have 3 kids, and they've just grown up to the point where I've reclaimed my sleep. So this is a very difficult question for me, because there are some days that I just want to lie in. But I would say that what gets me out of bed in the morning is having something to look forward to. Between all the chores and tasks of the day, I always make sure to schedule that one thing that I'm really excited about. It could be paddle, it could be painting, it could be just having a story that I want to write. And that motivates me to get the rest of the day started.
I think it's so important to have that anchor in the day, right? Something you're looking forward to, something you're excited about. And so many of us forget that in the daily grind of responsibilities and, just the everyday reality of life. Like life isn't a beautiful story as much as we would like it to be. But I hope that we can all make it one. And speaking of the fact that you have 3 kids, I'm sure it's not easy balancing and juggling the everyday sort of ins and outs of life, motherhood, responsibilities, with the amazing achievements that we see you achieving online, especially the latest workshop that you've just been going to be a part of. So tell me a little bit how you manage all that.
Again, you're being very kind to me. I'm really excited about Carrie West, though. That was definitely a big milestone. I've been hoping to be able to go to that workshop, and then it being online this year was one of the reasons I could go, because again, as a mother, I can't really afford to take out 6 whole weeks and go somewhere else, like to Seattle, and just dedicate it to my writing. So having all of these online opportunities is just such a good thing for a person like me. But as a mother, I do find it sometimes very difficult. So I just want to acknowledge that for all the other mothers out there who are trying to do something for themselves. The other day I was sitting with my friend, and we were trying to have a conversation, and I was literally interrupted every 5 minutes, and we were both just looking at each other. And I know what she was thinking, that how do you even get a paragraph of writing in with that level of distraction? And then there's also like all the chores and school pick and drops. Kids have exams. You have to make time for quality time with kids and family. So there's definitely a big challenge for mothers. I don't want to discount, though, that the importance of having help, because I do have a lot of help. You need to have a support system. I know people who are living in their home countries might have like a family that around that can provide that support system. Abroad, my husband and I just have conversations around what I need and how we can make the time for that. This was also advice given to me by other mothers who are artists and writers and creatives, that you need to let people around you know, and you've got to make time for it. I mean, people without kids make time for their jobs and their work, right? So you've got to do the same thing. I also want to point out that I do have someone coming in to help part-time with the cleaning and cooking, etc. So I think that sometimes a lot of mothers have these responsibilities that they really have to focus on, and they start feeling that they're not doing enough. Actually, that's already a lot you're doing. So I do have someone who helps me out with that as well. Um, I would say that it's really important to find your own rhythm. The world moves really fast, but you don't need to move along at the same pace. And you can reframe achievements for yourself. So, like attending your child's science fair and seeing the smile on their face should be as big of an achievement as getting a story acceptance. We just tend to focus more on our public achievements than our private ones. But my advice would be to hold your private blessings close to your heart as well and revel in those. It's the age of social media, because we're putting everything out there. The most important achievements feel like the ones that we can share with the world. But if you have a lot of private achievements, like the fact that you're a really good mom, I would ask you to also take pride in that. And there's plenty of opportunity out in the world. So it's not like there won't be enough for you. There'll be enough at your own pace and your own time, and you will have your share of success. What I like to do is just focus on like the baby steps. Otherwise, parents can have just really overwhelming days where nothing makes sense and they can easily feel really crushed by the amount of work they have to do. So I like breaking the tasks down. So it can be like write 300 words a day or complete edits on that one story, submit a story. I actually write all these tasks down in a to-do list, and then I cross them out. Sometimes I even write down basic things like cook a meal, because I have to tell myself what I've done in that day so that later on when I hear about other people or I look back at my own day and it feels like it's just disappeared into a void, I have that reminder that no, it was actually a productive day. It's just that productivity is subjective. So yeah, so baby steps, and don't look at the big picture too often because it can intimidate you.
I think that is amazing advice, and I am going to send this podcast to every mother I know when it comes out. So many of my mom friends really needed to hear what you just said, where it's such a fast-paced, social media obsessed world where, like you said, we're always seeing things online. And of course, everything you just told me, as someone who follows you online, I don't know any of that, right? So what I'm seeing is a very small portion of your very wholesome life, actually. And I'm wondering, with everything that you're juggling and managing in this fast-paced world, what helps you really slow down and focus on your well-being?
Yeah, I totally agree with you. We don't see everyone's entire life, and that is kind of how social media can be tricky. I really do admire people who are curating their life to put it out there, because that's kind of like it's marketing, right? Your brand, you're marketing yourself. And I do admire that angle of it, but I do also agree with you, though. You have to consciously remind ourselves that that's not the entirety of it. Everyone's living a whole other life, and that's just the tip of the iceberg, so to speak. So yeah, in this fast-paced world, what helped me with my well-being? I kind of answered this before as well, but the continuation of that would be that I think spending time with my kids is the biggest thing that helps me slow down and ignore the world outside. When kids talk, they love long, meandering conversations. They love you to tell them stories. They want to play like the really lengthy board games, like Dungeons and Dragons and Monopoly and things like that. And all of those things require me to be present in the moment. Another thing is that kids grow up really fast. So when you see them, suddenly one day you're like, oh my God, they have changed so much and so quickly. So it's a constant reminder of how fleeting time is, and we don't want to spend that time focusing on the wrong thing. At the same time, motherhood can kind of take over your life. So the other thing I really like to do is take time out for things I love that are just solely for me. This could be some kind of exercise or just reading a book. And then that becomes my little bubble in which I'm doing something calming for myself. Um, like I love just painting or teaching myself something new. Like these days, I have started teaching myself animation on Procreate Dreams, which is really fun. I'm doing this random learning thing. And when my kids were very little, I started teaching myself Arabic calligraphy. And it was one of those like recorded lessons that you can get on Udemy. So while they're playing at the park, I'd listen to my recorded lesson. And finding those little things, they don't have to add up to a career trajectory or anything like that. It could just be a new language you're learning or a new story you're reading, just something that focuses on your individual growth. So I love that. And then, of course, the moment in the morning when the whole house is empty and you can make a cup of coffee and do whatever you want. And for the moms with older kids, they would understand that moment is pure magic.
I think that cup of coffee in the morning is what gets so many of us going, right? I mean, when Ramadan comes, I think that's the hardest thing for so many of us to give up as well, because that just really sets the tone for your whole day. And I love acknowledging, like you said, those little moments that are not making up the big picture, that are not necessarily, something that you could share on social media or be like, oh, this is this massive achievement, but it's something that fulfills you inside.
Totally agree. Yeah. And also, I did miss that cup of coffee this Ramadan a lot. And having it in the evening after you open your fast is just not the same.
It's really not. But also, I love that you have so many different expressions for your creativity, and you're constantly looking for something or the other to learn, to grow. And what I find really interesting about your work is that you're an artist and you're also a writer. And I'm wondering if you're attracted to both of those fields of creativity as a way of expression because they're similar, or because they allow you to express different aspects of your creativity.
So I mean, the way that they are similar is that they both require you to use your imagination, which is something I've always loved to do. And I've often noticed that when people are creative, their creativity spills over in different ways. So the same person might be a knitter and a crafter, or they might be, they might draw things and they may also write things. So yeah, there's definitely that crossover because they're both creative endeavors. But for me personally, yes, they fulfill different aspects of me. The funny thing is, I was never very good at either one. Writing was something I'd always done. Like I always liked doing it, and I was in maybe the top section of the class if you think about English language in school, but never the best. I just wrote for myself, and I never even thought that you need to study writing. I didn't think that would yield anything. And I was always terrible at art. Like I always used to make the strangest things in my art exams in school, and the teacher would be trying to explain to me how this didn't work and this might get a C. So yeah, the thing I've always told myself is that art is experimentation, and that is how I excused my art that might have been considered awful by an art teacher, for example. And the funny thing is, these two different forms of art, I react very differently to them. So my ego is very wrapped up in my writing. If you come to me and tell me that you didn't love something I wrote that's been published, I will feel very bad. The reviews will impact me. But for my art, I agree. I'll be like, yes, I think it does suck probably, and it still won't impact me. I'll still keep on making art. And this latter feeling is actually what you need for art in general. So I've been trying to incorporate that more into how I feel about my writing as well. Like, it's okay if you didn't like it, or it's okay if it was rejected. I'm doing it anyway because this is something I really want to do. Yeah, so I picked up both art and writing again when I was in my early 20s. I was a young mom and I really needed to redefine what I was going to do with my life. And I ended up doing an MA in fine art from the University of the Arts London. And I loved the experience. I learned so much about myself throughout that entire process. I also had an incredible teacher. If anyone wants to apply to his course, his name is Jonathan Kearney. It was an insane 2-year journey of growth. Like, I would recommend all moms study something after you've had kids. It's just a really great way to connect with yourself. And then at the end of it in 2019, since I had basically jumped to an MA Fine Art without doing a bachelor's in art, I still felt like I had a lot to learn about art, but I had become much more confident in my ability to pierce both the art and writing worlds. I started to go for exhibitions in Jeddah and connect with other artists, and I did the same with writing. And that's actually when I wrote the Salam award winning story, The Puppet Master, which kind of helped me launch my writing career, so to speak. And I also began to teach myself digital illustration because I wanted to segue into fantasy art and book covers and things like that. And that's really what I've been doing since then, like freelance book covers and art. Like I had a illustration in Usman Malik's Midnight Doorways, or I made like a full color fantasy cover art for the Tasavvur magazine for one of the issues. And my favorite was these two fantasy maps I made that appeared at the beginning of a novel. I've always loved those. So it was really exciting to get a chance to do that. Um, yeah, so it was basically this is how I brought both of those things together. And the main crossover right now for me is that both of them are kind of storytelling, and I consider myself a storyteller, which is also where my podcast comes in. I like to tell stories out loud and add a little bit of sound effects and music to it, which is just something I'm experimenting with. Someone in the US already does that. His name is LeVar Burton, and he's very famous. He has a fantastic, iconic voice, and obviously I can't match up to him. But the idea was to tell stories the way I tell stories to my kids and make them a bit of a journey for the listener. So yeah, all of these things are basically just another version of storytelling for me.
And I love the fact that you brought up all these, fantasy maps and working on Midnight Doorways, because the Salam Award and Usman Malik are really sort of what I would call almost the pioneers of like science fiction, modern science fiction in Pakistan, right? And I think it's so interesting, Desi science fiction. I've been reading sort of, I don't know how to term it. It's like, it is a book about magic and science fiction, but it's also Islamically focused. Recently, I've been reading the Devabad trilogy. And so I would just love to know more about how science fiction allows you to explore maybe certain aspects of yourself or the world around you in ways that other genres may not.
So science fiction is a more specific term, and I'm just gonna, for the sake of our conversation, I'm just gonna switch over to a broader term, which is speculative fiction. That's an umbrella term for everything like science fiction, fantasy, horror, and all of those other genres in between, like slipstream or dark fantasy or dark science fiction. Yeah, so I'm going to use that term. And yes, you're right. Salam Award has been a big pioneer. They're actually so helpful. And I would recommend all writers listening to this podcast to find a way to get connected with the Salam Award team, because they really do mentor you, and they can be a great doorway to, figuring out how writing works internationally and locally. Yeah, so as far as how this genre helps us explore the world and things like that, it certainly is a very freeing genre, which is something I've heard from people who've transitioned from writing realism to speculative fiction. I mean, we can see in Alice in Wonderland, right? Things can get as weird as the author wants. Because in speculative fiction, sometimes you're creating alternate realities, if not whole worlds, and you get this unique chance to place characters in situations that make a person reflect rather than just on the nose telling them, what's going on. Like the 5th season by N.K. Jemisin is such an interesting exploration of African American history and racism and things like that, and geography and power. The politics of power, but none of it is really said outright. It's all stuff that you dig into as you explore that world and the superpowered people who live in it. And because you're bombarded again by news and social media, and especially with all of the things that are happening in the world right now, it's very easy to get desensitized. So if someone talks to you about a political reality happening at present, it might not hit home the same way, but speculative fiction, it'll present that information in a whole different way that's going to force you to confront what you've been avoiding. And so my favorite quote about this genre is from Ursula Le Guin, who I don't particularly like the author herself. Sorry for people who are fans of her. But I do think this quote is very appropriate, which is that science fiction is descriptive, not predictive. So she's saying that we're not here to prophesy the future. It's more like take a deep look, and look at the world that you're living in. And they can do that even with futuristic novels like we know about 1984, or Fahrenheit 451, or even Handmaid's Tale, which everybody knows about. They're basically holding up a mirror to the world and making you question where you're headed. And it's not just these dystopian tales. You can have grand, sweeping adventures in secondary worlds like Lord of the Rings or Dune, and you can still be arriving at universal truths. That's really my favorite part of speculative fiction, is that at the core of it, the most powerful stories have a universal truth that almost everyone can relate to, that makes the reader sort of wake up. And there's something really beautiful and subtle about that, the truth emerging as a result of the exploration by the artist and the author, but also by the work that the reader puts into the story.
I definitely agree. I think sometimes it can be easier to talk about hard truths in these sort of fantasy or speculative worlds, right? Because it's almost easier to distance yourself, but at the same time, there is this messaging that's coming through. And usually by the end of the story, it really does hit home if it's written well. But speaking of, being creative and really describing or being descriptive about these things, one thing that I wanted to ask you, just as a bit of like a fun ending for our podcast, is what color are you and why? And feel free to get descriptive with us.
This is such a funny question, but I'm just going to be intuitive about it and say I think that I'm blue. I've always thought that I was like, if I had to identify with a color, it would be blue. And sometimes I feel a bit more burgundy, and sometimes I feel a bit more teal. But overall, I think of blue because I'm a cool-headed sort of person. I go through life without letting the actions of other people change the way I behave. A lot of people, for example, have said that I have very sort of naive air, or I can be too nice, and I'm like, that's just how I am. They also worry about my parenting. They're like, how are you going to be strict if you're so nice? And I feel like I found my own balance in all of these things, and the thoughts of others, I always listen to them, but they can't fully change me. That's just how I am. It's also very difficult to stress me out. I don't get stressed out about things. Like, the funny thing is I've always enjoyed exams when I know other people are really stressing about them. It is, however, very easy for me to feel sad. I do get crushed quite easily and this is where the challenge for writing comes in, which is like a game of rejection. So this is something I've had to work on. Overall, I like holding on to small joys and finding ways to help people as I navigate the world.
Honestly, who are you? How do you not get stressed easily? Please, I need whatever you have in the morning.
But then I have the other problem, right? That I get sad easily. I'm like sadness from inside out.
No, I get that. But
yeah.
I love that. I feel like I am a teal as well. So I love that, our colors are so similar. But
yeah,
of dealing with rejections, because writing is very much rejection. Just to close us off, what advice would you have for young writers for whom breaking into the writing world can be overwhelming?
Yeah, well, I mean, you're right about the rejection part. I think the key is to write a lot. The only way to get better at writing is to write, and ultimately it will pay off. Your work will transform, and you won't see it immediately. It's when you go back and read very, very old work that you'll see how far you've come. And I would say that find a community ASAP. There are so many that have developed now, even in Pakistan. I mean, there's the Sabr magazine where you can submit your stories if you're a Pakistani writer. There's Salam Award. They're just waiting for you to submit. And even if you don't win, they will reach out to you and hold hands with you and make you part of this wonderful community of writers. They also have a workshop going on in collaboration with LUMS, which I think is a fantastic opportunity for almost all Pakistani writers. And I think LUMS has a few other ones as well, like the Young Writers Workshop.
Mm-hmm.
And the online communities are great too. So you can find communities on Threads, Blue Sky, Twitter, Discord. Just look around, do your research online. There's almost everything is accessible nowadays, connect with people online, and it'll be everything. You'll find all the resources you need. A great resource if you're looking to submit your stories now is the SFWA website. It lists all the paying magazines where you can submit your stories. So do a little research, read the magazines to see what kind of work they want, and then if you think you're the right fit, send your story and you're off. And just what we were talking about earlier, remember that rejection of all kinds is a big part of the writing process. The most famous writers still deal with rejection. They just don't quit. So you're a writer if you write, whether you've published or not. And the only way you stop being a writer is if you quit.
I think that's a brilliant note to leave our listeners with something to think about. So, Kehkashan, thank you so much for being here with us today. It was such a pleasure to have you on the episode. And to all of our listeners, thank you for always tuning in, and see you all soon next time.